Hello and welcome to the Dedicated Show. I am Kate Straszny, founder of Dedicated and host of the Dedicated Show. I'm really excited to come back with another episode where we're actually going to talk about becoming data driven, why it's hard, what you can do about it, and we'll also talk about the role that cognitive bias plays in all of this. Now, we do have a special guest that I'm going to announce in just a second. Before I do, I want to remind everyone sort of the rules and the fun parts of the Dedicated Show. The rules are there are no rules. Please engage with us, comment, and ask questions. We'll try to take as many live questions and comments as we can throughout the show. That's what makes the live show fun. It's the interaction from the audience. If you haven't already done so, you can go to dedicated.com/show to subscribe so you can get updates on what we're working on, what shows are coming up to make sure that you don't miss this. Now, our guest for today is Dan Everett. He is the owner of Insightful Research. He is also the janitor. I'm assuming this is a data janitor, but we'll confirm with him shortly. Tech support, CFO, CMO, and COO. And he is also a performer, which stay tuned to the end of the show. We're going to show you what sort of fun content he creates. I won't ruin it anymore. Before I bring him on to the show, I wanted to ask you a question. So use the chat either on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter, or wherever you're joining us from. And let us know with a yes or no. Have you ever had a problem influencing stakeholders? Just think back through your career or your school education system, wherever you are. Have you ever had an issue with influencing stakeholders? We will talk about that during the show as well. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bring Dan up on the virtual stage here. Hello, Dan. Welcome to the Dedicated Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited I'm excited to see you here, man. So I've seen your content online for years now, and I don't believe we really had a chance to chat. So this is a perfect opportunity for you and I to chat, for the audience to engage with us. I see comments are starting to come in. We've got John Lindsay, Kate and Dan live. Yeah, we are. So I see Dustin here. Lots of yeses coming in for the question, Dan. So people have issues. Now, before we get into talking about influencing stakeholders or anything else really, I want to start by talking about you and sort of let people know what it is that you do, who you are, and what does your day-to-day look like?
What does my day-to-day look like?
Mm-hmm.
Well, recently my day-to-day looks like I get up, I have coffee, I check email, check LinkedIn, see what's going on, respond to comments, and then I start writing. So I've been working on my course, online course on how to influence stakeholders. So that's been taking up the major part of my time lately. But a little bit more of a background about me. So in 1997, my first child was diagnosed with autism, and that started me on the path of understanding how the brain works. And then about the same time is when I started my journey in data and analytics. And then over the years, what I found is the things that I was learning to help my son could also be applicable to organizations to help improve decision-making, openness to change. And so that's sort of why I developed this workshop.
Wow, I didn't know that history. Very, very interesting. And I'm glad to see that you took that as an opportunity to learn more about that and also apply it to business. That's really amazing. And I could see how a study of how the brain works can help in most cases, but especially when you're trying to influence others as well. Just checking in on the comments, we started with a question for the audience about the difficulty or problems that they have influencing stakeholders. Have you ever had that issue, Dan? Have you ever had to influence stakeholders? No, never.
All the time. Let's be honest, Kate. The minute you move from being an individual contributor to a manager or some sort of leadership position, influencing others becomes part of your job. Whether it's in your job description or not, I like to say you're selling now, right? Because selling is just about persuading others to pick your value proposition, right? Yeah. And that's what we have to do. And especially data and analytics leaders, they have a very unique, I think, and challenging role because they sit in the middle of technology, data, and the business, and they sort of have to be the translators and the mediators between all of those different groups, right, to move some of these initiatives forward.
Yeah, and I just going back quickly for stakeholders, what do you actually mean when you talk about stakeholders? Let's define that
Yeah.
a bit more.
So stakeholders could be people that, could be executive leadership, right? So we're trying to convince the CFO to buy off on an MDM and data governance project. They could be people in mid-level management, right, that have to actually go plan how are we going to execute and implement the data governance program, or it could be the people on the front line that are actually doing the day-to-day work, right?
Right.
A lot of resistance comes at the front line, right, where people are like, I don't want to do this new process because I'm used to doing things the way that I used to do, right?
Right.
So I think when we use the term stakeholders, a lot of times we imply executives or maybe middle management, but it actually applies to everybody. Could be your own team if you have a team, right? How do you influence the people on your team? Not so much by authority, right? We can do it by authority, right? You have to do it because you report to me, and if you don't, I'm going to give you a bad review. The problem with that is that you get compliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you really want is you want people to be committed. Like, oh, I see why this is valuable. I see how it's going to help me, and I want to do it, because people that are committed are 20% more productive than people that are just compliant.
Right. That makes sense. Now, before I go into my next question, I actually had a question for the audience, and I want as many people as possible to participate in this one. So, in your one sentence, and Dan, this is not for you yet, for the audience, what does it mean to be data driven, right? In your mind, what are you thinking? What are you picturing? So just type in that answer, and wait 5 seconds, hit submit. I want to see the answers come out at the same time. Before while we give the audience a chance to answer that, I want to go back to something that you mentioned. So you said you wake up in the morning, you have coffee, you check LinkedIn, you check your comments. I know you're like LinkedIn famous now. You go in and you check on your you check on your fame. And then you mentioned you're working on a new project. So while the audience is answering the question about what it means to be data driven, why don't you tell the audience what your project is?
Yeah, so I did a poll on LinkedIn and said, what would you like an online course for the most? How to be data driven, how to influence stakeholders, AI ethics, and how to influence stakeholders was the number one answer. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm using research into how the brain processes information and makes decisions, right, to help data and analytics leaders understand how to develop a value proposition and how to message in order to influence stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. And how is this? So this is a workshop, you said. How is this going to be delivered?
Yeah, right now I'm developing it as an online course. So there's 7 modules and about 25 lessons.
Okay.
I'm just finishing up all the recordings on it. But what I really love to do is just do workshops with organizations specifically on their problems, because it's so much more fun. You get on the whiteboard and there's all the interaction. And
Yeah, I know. Sometimes those live workshops or in-person workshops are just so much more powerful, where you get people in the room and you get to interact and feed off their energy.
Yeah.
All right, Dan, before we put you on the spot about defining data-driven or what it means to be data-driven, I'm just going to read off a couple of these responses that we've gotten. Thanks for the audience for engaging with us. So we've got an answer here: have data literacy and data mindset to use in business decisions making process. We've got data-driven means having evidence in the data to support your decision or creative thinking. Got lots of responses coming in, taking decisions based on data. So yeah, data-driven decision making. Lots of overlap, similarities. I see Dustin's here. It's a mindset. Constantly think about how you can use data to improve the current state, solving a challenge. And I think this one's great, right to the point, to influence decisions based on data. Now, Dan, now that we've read what everyone else thinks, let's hear your definition. What exactly does it mean to be data driven?
Well, I think that this is the question we should be asking ourselves, because we keep saying, "Oh, we need to be more data driven," but okay, what do we exactly mean by that? For me, data driven means decisions based on objective evaluation of facts against clearly defined criteria and weightings. So not all data is facts, right? So when I say facts, I mean data that we've validated the accuracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we understand how it was gathered and that sort of thing. And then, criterion weightings, some form of an evidence-based methodology, right? It might be as simple as A/B testing, or it could be, like if anybody has done a RFP, right? You have a decision framework, right? Scalability and ease of use, and right, this is the weighting for each one of those criteria, right? And then we base our decision based on that decision matrix.
You
So
you brought me back. You said RFP. For those who are not familiar,
oh,
it's a request for proposal. You
yes.
brought me back to my consulting days where putting RFPs together was a regular thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by decisions based on objective evaluation of facts against clearly defined criteria and weighting. That's what I
Mhm.
call data driven.
I think I just read that in an article you wrote. It was either an article or a longer form post. Right
Yeah.
before a call, I was reading through that, and I remember those. You said it has to be objective, have a specific criteria and weightings.
Right.
Um, I'll just quickly see. I see T. Scott's added something about the term data driven. So he doesn't. Some people don't like to be driven over the edge, driven to
Right.
distraction. They like to drive. So, what are your thoughts on using like data inspired, data enabled, or
So
data powered as an
so
alternative?
there's a number of terms that I'm not necessarily crazy about. I think that it's
Like what?
more
Let's make a list, Dan. Like what? Tell us.
well. Okay, data driven is one. I
Okay.
think it's really data and analytics informed, right?
Oh yeah, George just said the same thing. He likes
Right.
data
But
informed. There you go.
but the term is in use, right? That's the term that everybody's using. So
Correct.
trying to change that into some other term is much more difficult than just trying to clearly define what we mean when we say that
Yeah.
and use that as the basis for everything else that comes after.
And I don't personally have a problem with data driven. I mean, you drive your decisions based on
Right.
data. I feel like it makes sense to
Right.
me. Me and T. Scott, we're gonna have a call later. He's on my show in a couple of weeks, I think. So we're
Okay,
gonna
so
we're gonna
you're
talk
gonna
about
debate
this.
the data driven. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to convert him to data driven. So first of all, it's hard to define what data driven is or even pick the right term, right? But let's talk about actually becoming data driven as an
Mhm.
organization.
Right.
Why are companies really struggling with this? Is it a lack of data? Is it a lack of skills? Is it a lack of tools, which we know there are plenty of those out there?
Mhm.
Why do you think
Well,
what's the hardest part?
yeah. So for me, when I think about what are the sort of the levers that we can pull to become data driven, we have technology. So we have cloud, AI and analytics, and data management. We have methodologies. I talked about A/B testing and decision matrix. There are things like net present value calculations where we look at, what we think the risk and reward are for different options, right? And we can compare them to others so we can make informed investments. We have governance, policy and procedures, risk controls and processes, audits and review boards, and we have people, roles and responsibilities, authority, accountability, training and enablement, all of those sorts of things. And I would say that overall, we do a good job at those things in most organizations. But we still, if you look at the research from New Vantage Partners, struggle to become data driven. And what's stopping that is behavior change, right? Because at the end of the day, we actually have to change people's behavior to become data driven.
And that's easy to do, no? Aren't we so easy to manipulate?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's super easy to do.
That's
You
why
know,
there are a million books on how to transform and habits and all of that, because I think it is probably one of the most difficult things to do is
right,
to change behavior.
right. The hardest part is that we don't actually. So we make decisions based on objective evaluation of facts. But what brain researchers show is that most decisions we make based on something called cognitive bias. And cognitive bias is just a mental shortcut, right, to make a decision, right? So think of it like an AI algorithm, and it uses generalization, approximation, and assumption to make a decision as quickly as possible, right?
And why do
You,
we need that, like as humans?
the reason that we do that is because the I'll just call it the AI algorithm, right? Because why not, right? The algorithm that's making those decisions developed for survival mechanisms. So you're at the watering hole and you see something in the bushes and orange stripes, tiger, flee, right? Because even making a decision faster is more important than making an accurate decision for survival.
Yeah.
So that's how that little algorithm developed, right? It developed as a safety mechanism. Now, there's an area of the brain which is right in the front is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part that does attention, evaluation, and what we think of as like logical processing of information. But it's got limited memory, right? So it can only hold like 5 to 7 things in memory at once, and it's also uses a lot of energy. So the brain is about 2% of body mass, but uses about 20% of the body's energy. So it uses that same algorithm to save energy, to conserve energy, and also to expand capacity, right? We have so much to do, right, on a day-to-day basis, so much data, right, that if we tried to objectively evaluate every little piece of information to make a decision, every decision, we'd be exhausted.
Yes.
Right? So that's why it uses that same mechanism, those same mental shortcuts.
And I think it would be helpful maybe for some people to walk through a couple of examples of different types of cognitive biases.
Yeah. So let me use the example. I'm going to stick with MDM and data governance. You want to implement an MDM and data governance project, and you've figured out that you can help reduce days sales outstanding, which is one of the CFO's big hot buttons, right? And so you put together a really good business justification, right, where you can show that, hey, if I improve tax data, there'll be less invoice disputes. If I improve ship to data, we won't ship to the wrong address, which delays invoices getting paid, right? Those sorts of things. You have a really good value proposition. You bring it to the CFO and you get the nope, not interested. So one of the things that might happen is that the CFO had a bad experience with MDM at a previous company, right? Almost got fired, right? And
Yeah.
so that memory and the emotion attached with it are there. And there's something called availability heuristics. So when you're making a decision, the first piece of information that comes to your mind, the most recent piece or something that has a really strong emotional memory is what comes up. So the minute that memory comes back into their mind, they feel that sort of anxiety of almost getting fired, right? And it creates resistance to your proposal. Now, okay.
No, I just love this because there are so many instances where that could be used to manipulate and influence decisions. Because you said either some big emotional thing that memory that comes to mind, or the most recent memory, right? And I think marketers and advertising use that.
Oh, they do.
Way. Yeah.
Yeah. Consumer packaged goods companies use this all the time, as well as politics. So yeah. It used to be the estate tax, and then they changed it to the death tax, right? Well, nobody wants death. I don't want to be taxed when I die, right? So that's how they influence voters. Yes, happens all.
Yes, it's so interesting how the human brain works. So I actually could spend and like 6 hours. We were joking earlier that we can go for 6 hours talking about this because it really is so interesting.
Right.
But I think that that's a beautiful example of cognitive bias and how that might affect someone in the workplace. Now, let's talk about how that might help or hinder someone in their journey of becoming data driven. How can we use cognitive bias either to our advantage to help someone become data driven, or how does that actually maybe cause challenges in other cases?
Yeah. So one is if you understand um, how the brain works and how cognitive bias is impacting decisions, right? Then you can start to develop strategies to mitigate it. So I'll just continue with the example of the MDM and data governance. So let's say that the head of receivables is somebody that the CFO already trusts, right? They have a trusted relationship with them. And they had a good experience with MDM in the past, right? You can sort of use them as an ally to sort of mitigate that availability heuristics from the CFO. But the other thing is, if there are other things that are probably feeding into the CFO's decision. So delay discounting is one where we see less value in benefits that are further away in time. So delay discounting. So, if you go in and say, okay, I've got this big MDM project and it's 12 months and the CFO is going, well, I'm thinking it's 18 months because of my past experience, right? And so then I'm going to decrease the value that I ascribe to MDM because it's so far away. Again, we talk about start small and get quick wins. This is why, because of delay discounting. Right.
I literally just wrote, I don't know if you can't see. I just wrote small wins because that was going to be my next question. Like, can we use small wins
Right.
to show maybe the benefits of being data driven and
Right.
maybe helping with some of that culture change?
Right.
Because then that recent memory thing that you talked about earlier can also be triggered. Like, hey, remember we had great success here. It was small, but whatever. That's the last thing they remember.
Or instead of showing it as a big, like, here's a big MDM project, like we're just focusing on this one use case, right? And then we're going to, and the head of receivables has validated that he's done this at a previous company, right? So you're sort of getting that ally, something that's called the halo effect, to help mitigate the CFO's response. So I have this whole scenario that I walk through as part of
your workshop that you're working on. By the way, so we don't lose this, where can people go to actually learn about that workshop? Or is there a wait list? Is there a website? Do they just follow you on LinkedIn?
You can DM me directly on LinkedIn or on my website, insightfulresearch.com. In the services section, there's a link for that.
Okay. So going back to the whole concept of cognitive bias, are we self-aware when this is happening? Can we self-detect? Can we know that we're doing this?
It's actually really hard to self-detect because think about it like this. So you're in a car and you're driving and somebody cuts you off and you slam on the brakes, right?
Yeah. Or slam into them. Depends on the mood.
Let's just say you slammed on the brakes.
Okay.
You slam on the brakes. Now you didn't evaluate how fast am I going? How close are they? Right? It wasn't a conscious decision, right? It was a non-conscious decision.
Yep.
So that's how cognitive bias works. And it's really hard to self-detect because we make the decision and then afterwards we validate our decision. We select the facts to validate our point of view. So it's hard for us to self-detect, but we can see it in other people. So we can develop organizational structures to talk about cognitive bias.
It seems like such a powerful tool. And I do agree. I think it is easier to detect it in others. And you can always sort of look back at your own decisions and try to think, well, why did I choose this or that? It's
Right.
hard to look at yourself though. That's whole separate
No,
question.
it is. And I want to stress that cognitive bias is not inherently bad,
Yeah.
right? It's not, right? We make it helps us make lots of decisions and that sort of thing. But when the scope and the size of the impact is large, right? We need to evaluate it. And one way, I like little key phrases. So one phrase that I like is, if you have a brain, you have cognitive bias, right? So when you're making a decision, a big decision, if you just say to yourself, if I have a brain, I have cognitive bias, that's sort of like a key to just say, okay, should I stop here and evaluate like how cognitive bias might be impacting my decision?
Yeah. If we only stopped and thought about things before we made decisions or said things, right? That would be great.
The other thing that's really interesting about cognitive bias and the way to sort of self-detect is through emotion. Now, we don't necessarily think about emotion when we think about being data-driven, but emotion and feeling are key pieces of information that let you know that cognitive bias may have kicked in. So you may have heard of, the fight or flight response, or the amygdala hijack. So the amygdala is the piece where the little algorithm is running, right, and is trying to resolve uncertainty. And then if it detects a threat or what it perceives as a threat, it generates emotional energy, right? And so if you start to become aware of like, oh, like I feel tense or anxious, right? That's a key of like, oh, okay, then maybe I've been triggered, and maybe my decisions aren't as objective as I think that they are.
Interesting. I think, again, something that I would love to work on personally as well, to just have that self-awareness. We're so caught up in everything, I think. Maybe not you, Dan, because I feel like
We
you're more
are no. Everybody, if you have a brain, you have cognitive. I am not immune to it.
well,
I've
I
just
think
had more
sometimes, like you
practice
said,
at
it's not this evil thing. It is
no,
sometimes good, and it could save your life one day. Where
right,
there's the story of the snake or the garden hose, right? Where you're not sure what it is, where you're walking and you see this green squiggly thing, and you sort of jump
right,
back because you think it's a snake.
right,
And yeah, you might look stupid because it's not, but if it was, you
right,
might have saved your own life.
right.
Um, Quick question here I see from Anna, and somebody else asked this earlier. Yes, you feel free to hop. We are recording this, so you will see this on LinkedIn and YouTube, and you'll be able to watch this on. I think the easiest place is probably on YouTube if you just go to Dedicated and look for the show. Um, Dan, I know we're getting close to time. By the way, for the audience, if there are any specific questions, feel free to drop those in the comments, and we'll either take them now or maybe address them in the comments later. But wanted to ask you if you have any advice that you can share with the audience in terms of influencing stakeholders or becoming data driven or controlling cognitive bias, or any closing words on the whole topic.
Okay, so I think two things. One, if you have a brain, you have cognitive bias, right? To just stop and think about like, am I objectively evaluating? Number two is when you're having a discussion with somebody, ask yourself, do you want to be right or do you want the best outcome? Because a lot of times we want to prove our point of view is right, and it may be right, but trying to prove that you're right, is that going to get you the best outcome that you want?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I want to be right, Dan, but okay, let's. What else?
Well, we all want to be right, because
I know, I can't help it.
in the brain, when you think you're right, even if you're not, it creates a good emotion, right? A reward emotion. When
Yeah,
you're wrong, it creates a threat emotion, right? So we're naturally wired to want to avoid being wrong.
yeah. But sometimes in the fight to be right, we try so hard that when we are wrong, it's just such more of a painful experience after you really try to convince people you were right.
Right.
I've been there.
And finally, just recognize that most of what other people are saying is the reason may not actually be the reason of why they're saying no, or whatever they're saying.
Yeah, I think that the 3 whys or the 5 whys could be helpful here, where you just dig a little deeper, right? And just really get to the underlying, because their immediate reaction, immediate words might not be the actual reason, right?
I'd like to understand why you have that position.
Right? And then why? Why that? Yeah. It's like the 5-year-old asking all the questions.
That's right.
So for those who stuck around, you're in for a special treat here. Dan and I are going to hop backstage for a minute or two while I play a video. So Dan is great on LinkedIn. He not only posts insightful content and shares and teaches us just like he did today. Thanks, Dan. I actually did learn a lot. He's also quite creative and entertaining. So I won't ruin it. I'm just going to play the video. Enjoy it. We'll see you online. So Dan, thank you again so much for everything. Please, everybody, follow Dan on LinkedIn and make sure you check out that program that he has coming out, Brain-Based Leadership. It's all about influencing stakeholders. So without